Hello there.
There's a specific kind of silence that settles in around 4 p.m. on a Tuesday. It's not the peaceful silence of a morning well spent, but rather a heavy, lingering stillness that makes you notice the dust motes dancing in a single sliver of sunlight. You're sitting there, perhaps staring at a blinking cursor on a screen or watching the shadows stretch across the floorboards, and suddenly, the weight of the world's hustle feels suffocating. You look around, and it feels like everyone else is operating on a different frequency. Your friends are hitting milestones like they're checking off a grocery list. The strangers on your feed are celebrating big wins in neon colors. And then there's you. You feel like a slow motion frame in a high-speed film. You aren't exactly standing still. You're breathing, you're trying, you're showing up, treading water in a sea of people who seem to be sprinting on the surface. It's that quiet, nagging ache in the back of your mind that whispers, you're falling behind. It's the guilt that arrives when you realize you've been staring at the same page for an hour, or the way your heart sinks when you realize your 5-year plan looks more like a messy sketch than a finished map. It's easy to look at this lack of velocity and call it failure. It's easy to mistake a scenic route for a dead end. But maybe, just maybe, the clock in your head is running on a rhythm the rest of the world has simply forgotten how to hear. We live in a culture that treats time like a competitive sport. We've been conditioned to believe that if we aren't accelerating, we are decaying. There is this invisible social speedometer constantly judging our progress, whispering that we should be hitting certain RPMs by the time we are 25, 30, or 40. When we can't keep up with that artificial pace, we start to internalize the friction. We call it laziness or lack of discipline, but often, it's just the natural resistance of a soul that wasn't built for a factory assembly line. Think about a forest for a moment. If you look at an oak tree, you don't see it frantically trying to outgrow the pine next to it. It doesn't look at the bamboo, which can grow 3 feet in a single day, and feel like a failure because it only added an inch to its girth this year. The oak understands something we've forgotten, that deep roots require time, and some of the strongest structures in nature are the ones that grew the slowest. Psychologically, we are prone to upward social comparison. We compare our behind-the-scenes footage, the messy mornings, the indecision, the days where we just can't find the energy, to everyone else's highlight reel. We see the finished product and ignore the years of invisible, slow-motion gestation that came before it. It is completely natural to feel a sense of mourning for the version of yourself that you thought would be further along by now. That grief is real, and it's okay to sit with it. But we have to realize that slow is not a synonym for static. Just because your progress isn't loud or visible to a casual observer doesn't mean it isn't happening. Sometimes, the most important work is the internal recalibration, the quiet shift in how we see ourselves, that happens when the world thinks we are doing nothing at all. You aren't a broken machine. You're a living thing, and living things have seasons. Some seasons are for blooming, but many more are for the quiet, slow preparation of the soil. I remember a summer a few years ago that felt like a long, suffocating pause. I had just moved into a tiny, sun-drenched apartment with floors that creaked under the slightest breather. At the time, I felt like I was drifting. While my peers were posting about their promotions and their new homes, my biggest accomplishment for the day was often just remembering to water the single pothose plant sitting on my windowsill. I remember sitting on my balcony one Tuesday afternoon, the air thick with the smell of scorched asphalt and blooming jasmine. I was watching a snail crawl across the rusted metal railing. It was so incredibly small, a tiny speck of life against the vastness of the city skyline. I sat there for what felt like hours, paralyzed by my own thoughts, watching this creature move. It was agonizingly slow. I kept thinking, why aren't you moving faster? At this rate, you'll never get to the other side before the sun goes down. I felt a strange, bitter kinship with that snail. I was 20-something, and I felt like I was moving at that exact same pace. I had a notebook full of half-baked ideas that I was too scared to finish, and a heart full of ambitions that felt like lead weights. The silence in my apartment was so loud it felt like a physical pressure against my eardrums. I could hear the distant siren of an ambulance, the muffled laughter of neighbors down the hall, and the ticking of a wall clock that seemed to be mocking my lack of momentum. I remember the feeling of my palms sweating against the cold metal of the railing as I leaned forward, staring at my reflection in the glass door. I looked tired. Not the kind of tired that a night's sleep can fix, but the kind of soul weariness that comes from constantly checking the rearview mirror to see who is gaining on you. I felt like a ghost in my own life, watching the world move in vibrant, high-definition streaks while I remained a blurry, static image. I eventually reached out a finger, intending to nudge the snail, to give it some kind of help to speed it up. But as I got closer, I stopped. I noticed the trail it left behind, a shimmering, silver path that caught the golden hour light. It was beautiful. Even though it was moving slowly, it was leaving a mark. It wasn't failing to cross the railing. It was simply experiencing the texture of the metal in a way I never would. That afternoon, the snail didn't reach the end before the sun set. It just found a cool, shaded spot under a leaf and stopped. And for the first time in months, I let myself breathe, realizing that maybe I didn't need to reach the end of the railing today, either. After that afternoon on the balcony, something shifted. It wasn't a sudden burst of productivity or a dramatic makeover of my life. It was more like the tide slowly turning in the middle of the night. I started to realize that my obsession with speed was actually a form of violence against my own nature. I had been treating my life like a race to be won, rather than a story to be lived. We often confuse speed with substance. We think that because someone is moving quickly, they must be going somewhere meaningful. But you can drive 100 miles an hour in a circle and still end up exactly where you started. Conversely, you can walk a single mile with your eyes wide open and come home with a soul full of wonder. What if we stopped viewing our slow periods as gaps in our progress? What if, instead, we saw them as necessary periods of integration? When we move slowly, we notice the details. We hear the nuances in a conversation that we would have missed if we were rushing to the next appointment. We feel the texture of our own emotions, even the uncomfortable ones, instead of numbing them with the dopamine of constant doing. This shift in perspective is about moving from the Chronos of the world, the ticking, unforgiving clock, to a sense of Kairos, which is the right or opportune moment. It's the realization that things have their own natural timing that is entirely independent of our anxiety. A flower doesn't bloom faster because you stand over it and yell at it to hurry up. It blooms when the conditions are right, when it has gathered enough strength from the soil and enough warmth from the sun. Accepting your pace isn't about giving up or settling for less. It's actually an act of immense courage. It's the bravery to say, I am here, and this is how much I can carry today, and that is enough. It's finding a quiet, stubborn peace in the middle of a world that is constantly trying to make you feel inadequate for simply being human. When you stop fighting the current of your own life, you find that you aren't sinking. You're finally, for the first time, learning how to float. So, the next time you find yourself staring at the ceiling, wondering why the rest of the world seems to be moving in fast forward while you're stuck in a gentle blur, take a deep breath. Let the tension leave your shoulders. There is no audience watching you with a stopwatch. There is no cosmic scoreboard counting how many goals you've reached by a certain Tuesday in April. There is only you, the air in your lungs, and the unique path beneath your feet. If today all you did was exist, that is plenty. If your only victory was being kind to yourself when you felt like you were falling behind, that is a monumental success. We are all just travelers on different roads, and some of those roads are meant to be wandered, not sprinted through. The shadows will continue to stretch, the seasons will continue to turn, and you will get where you need to go in exactly the time you were meant to arrive. As you turn off your screen and the room grows quiet, remember that the stars don't compete for brilliance, and the moon doesn't apologize for its slow, changing phases. It just exists, beautiful and patient, in the dark. So, tell me, if you stopped measuring your worth by your speed, what beautiful things would you finally have the time to notice about yourself?
Thank you for listening, and see you in the next story.